Right now, there are 8 billion of you, 8 billion humans on this planet, in every corner of it. Mountains, deserts, islands, ice. You are, by any measure, one of the most successful species that has ever lived. But there was a moment, one specific moment in prehistory when that almost wasn't true, when the entire human population collapsed to somewhere between 1,000 and 10,000 individuals. Not 1,000 per country, 1,000 total. Fewer people than fit in a high school gymnasium, and almost none of them knew the others existed. This is the story of how your species nearly disappeared and what that near extinction left behind inside you. To understand what happened, you need to understand what the world looked like before. Around 100,000 years ago, anatomically modern humans had already been around for roughly 200,000 years. They used fire, they made tools, they buried their dead. Some had already left Africa, small groups, coastal migrations, following food. The population was never large, maybe a few 100,000 worldwide, but it was growing, spreading, finding its footing. And then something happened that almost ended all of it. Approximately 74,000 years ago, on the island of Sumatra, a supervolcano called Toba erupted. Not erupted like a news story. Erupted like nothing that has happened in human memory or recorded history of the last 2 million years. Geologist Michael Rampino at New York University estimated that Toba ejected roughly 2,800 cubic kilometers of material into the atmosphere. For scale, the 1980 Mount St. Helens eruption ejected 1 cubic kilometer. Toba ejected 2,800 times that. In a matter of days, a layer of ash blanketed South Asia, the Indian subcontinent, and parts of Africa. Some deposits found in India are 6 meters deep. 6 meters of ash just sitting on the ground. On top of the ash came the winter. Sulfur dioxide from the eruption formed aerosols in the stratosphere that reflected sunlight back into space. Global temperatures dropped. Estimates range from 3 to 15 degrees Celsius and stayed down for years, maybe a decade, maybe longer. Crops don't grow in volcanic winter. Animals migrate or die. Forests collapse. And the humans that depended on those forests, those animals, that warmth, had nowhere to go. Archaeologist Stanley Ambrose at the University of Illinois published research in 1998 linking the Toba eruption directly to what geneticists call the human population bottleneck. A bottleneck is exactly what it sounds like, a point where a large population gets squeezed down to almost nothing. The genetic evidence is in your DNA right now. Humans have remarkably low genetic diversity compared to other great apes. Chimpanzees living in a single forest in West Africa have more genetic variation between individuals than all 8 billion humans on Earth. All of us, every human alive, descended from a group so small that our entire species carries the genetic fingerprint of that near extinction. We are, genetically speaking, almost identical to each other, and that sameness is the scar. But here is where it gets stranger, because the exact size of the bottleneck and whether Toba caused it is still contested. Geneticist Lynn Jord at the University of Utah, analyzing mitochondrial DNA, estimated the bottleneck reduced the breeding population to as few as 10,000 individuals around that time. Others put the number lower, much lower. A 2010 study by Harpindi and colleagues suggested the effective population may have dropped to just 1,000 to 2,000 breeding adults. Breeding adults, not total humans, which means total population could have been under 10,000, maybe far under. Think about what that means geographically. These survivors weren't in one place. They were scattered, small bands separated by thousands of kilometers of collapsed ecosystem with no way to find each other. Some in East Africa, sheltered in coastal caves, some possibly on the southern African coast, where shellfish and tidal zones created a narrow refuge, each group alone, each group unaware the others existed. Each group the entire future of the human species. What did survival actually look like? Archaeologist Curtis Marion at Arizona State University excavated Pinnacle Point, a cave on the South African coast, and found evidence of humans living there during exactly this period, around 164,000 to 60,000 years ago. They were eating shellfish using red ochre, making small, bladed tools, surviving on the margin of the continent where the land met the sea. The ocean kept them alive, not because the ocean was generous, but because it was consistent. Tides come in, shellfish cling to rocks. Even in a volcanic winter, the sea doesn't stop, so they stayed for thousands of years. Small groups, maybe 20, 30 individuals. Everyone you know descended from people like that. Now here's the part that almost never gets discussed. What a bottleneck this severe does to a species isn't just demographic, it's psychological, it's behavioral. It's written into how you think. When a population collapses to a few small bands, the individuals who survive aren't random. They share traits, behavioral traits, that help them survive the specific pressure that killed everyone else. And those traits get amplified. Not because anyone chose them, because everyone who didn't have them died. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar at Oxford has spent decades studying the social architecture of human groups. His work suggests that humans are wired for groups of roughly 150 individuals, what became known as Dunbar's number. Above 150, social cohesion starts to fracture. You can't personally know everyone. Trust breaks down. Cooperation becomes harder. But Dunbar's deeper point is this: the ability to maintain complex social bonds, to track relationships, obligations, reputations, is what allowed small human groups to cooperate at a scale no other primate could match. During a bottleneck, groups that cooperated survived, groups that fractured died. The survivors, your ancestors, were the ones who could hold a group together under impossible pressure. And the cognitive machinery they used to do that is still running in your head right now. Your obsession with social reputation, your anxiety about being excluded from the group, your ability to track who owes whom what across dozens of relationships simultaneously. Your instinct to share food with people you trust and to remember precisely who didn't share back. These aren't personality quirks, they are survival software. Written during a volcanic winter 74,000 years ago on the coast of a continent most of your ancestors never left. But here is the turn that most people miss. The bottleneck didn't just select for cooperation, it selected for something darker. Because when resources collapse and population craters, the groups that survived weren't always the most cooperative. Sometimes they were the most territorial, the most suspicious of outsiders, the most willing to compete violently for the narrow coastal refuges, the shellfish beds, the fresh water. Archaeologist Lawrence Keeley at the University of Illinois at Chicago, in his 1996 book War Before Civilization, documented prehistoric skeletal evidence of interpersonal violence going back tens of thousands of years. Crushed skulls, cut marks on bone, arrowheads embedded in vertebrae. Not the exception, a consistent pattern. Your capacity for extraordinary cooperation and your capacity for extraordinary violence came out of the same event. The same pressure produced both. The same survivors carried both forward. After the bottleneck, after the volcanic winter ended, after the forests grew back, after the animals returned, something shifted. Around 70,000 to 60,000 years ago, a small group of humans left Africa again. Not many. Genetic analysis suggests the entire non-African human population today descended from a founding group of perhaps 1,000 to 2,000 individuals who crossed into the Arabian Peninsula. One crossing, one group, and from that crossing, everyone in Europe, Asia, the Americas, the Pacific, every non-African human alive today is the descendant of a group that could fit in a large apartment building. That is not a metaphor. That is what the genetics show. What drove them to leave? Nobody knows for certain. Maybe population pressure, as the African populations began to recover. Maybe climate shifts that opened a green corridor through the Sahara and into the Levant. Maybe, and this is the part that sits with you, the same restlessness that sits in you, the drive to see what's past the next ridge, to follow the coastline further than anyone has gone, to move. It's possible that wandering itself was selected for, that the groups who stayed put went extinct, and the ones who kept moving found the next food source, the next refuge, the next coast, and kept moving until they were everywhere. By 45,000 years ago, humans were in Europe. By 40,000 years ago, in Australia, which required crossing, open ocean. By 15,000 years ago, in the Americas. By 800 years ago, in New Zealand, the last habitable landmass on Earth to be reached. From a population that nearly blinked out 74,000 years ago, to every continent, every island, every climate zone. In geological time, that expansion happened instantly. So what does this mean for you today? It means that every human alive carries a specific kind of memory, not conscious, not verbal, but written in behavior and biology. The memory of scarcity. Your body hoards calories because your ancestors couldn't afford to waste them. Your brain lights up at social exclusion the same way it lights up at physical pain, because exclusion from the group 74,000 years ago was a death sentence. You sleep poorly in unfamiliar places because your ancestors, who slept deeply in unfamiliar places, didn't survive to become your ancestors. You feel a pull toward your own group, your tribe, your team, your nation, because tribal loyalty is what kept the group alive when there was almost no group left. These instincts are not flaws, they are evidence, evidence that you came from something that almost didn't make it. And here is the honest version of this. The bottleneck is over. The volcanic winter ended. The scarcity that shaped these instincts hasn't existed for most people, in most places, for thousands of years. You have refrigerators and hospitals and supply chains that move food across continents. You are not going to be expelled from the tribe and left to die in the ash. The instincts that got your ancestors through the worst moment in human history are still running, on hardware built for a world that no longer exists, solving problems that mostly aren't there anymore, in a body that doesn't know the emergency is over, the anxiety that wakes you at 3 a.m., the need to be liked, to be included, to be seen as useful, the tribal suspicion of people who look different, speak differently, eat differently, the compulsion to store food, money, status, followers. You are not broken. You are the product of people who survive something. Almost nothing survives. That is worth knowing, because knowing it doesn't make the instincts disappear. But it does give you the one thing your ancestors didn't have when they were huddled on that South African coast, eating shellfish in the dark, waiting for the sky to clear. The ability to look at what you're feeling, the fear, the hunger, the need for the group, and recognize it for what it is. Not a verdict, a receipt, proof that someone before you paid a price you'll never have to pay, and somehow made it through.